Good morning, everyone. I think we'll just wait another minute or so to see if we can get a few more attendees online, and then we will get started. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. This is Christy Prescott. I'm the manager of renewable power contracts at United Illuminating. Welcome to the LREC ZREC Year 8 RFP informational webinar. Today we're going to cover some information regarding the LREC ZREC program. We're going to start with a program overview. Our goals for the meeting are as follows. We want to familiarize you with the overall LREC ZREC RFP requirements, and we need to provide you an update of the years 1 through 7 RFPs. And we're going to provide a summary of the procurement process that is utilized to select projects. As a reminder today, for presentation questions, we need you to submit questions via email only. You'll submit those to lrec.zrec@eversource.com. Please do not submit questions via the GoToWebinar. Only email questions will be addressed. As typical, a master list of all questions and answers that were not addressed during the presentation will be sent to all webinar participants, if that's applicable. Also, as a reminder, the standard contract is the controlling document. In the event that any inconsistency between provisions of the LREC ZREC RFP or any part of this presentation, the provisions of the standard contract are controlling. Bidders should review the standard contract and all associated documents thoroughly and submit their bids based upon the standard contract, which will solely govern the transactions between the selected bidder and their counterparty company through the term of the resulting contract. I'm going to turn it over to Laura Purbeck to summarize the Eversource program results to date, and we'll follow our agenda momentarily.
Good morning, everyone. This is Laura Purbeck. So currently, Eversource has over 1,800 active LREC ZREC contracts. In the chart that you'll see on the screen now, you can tell the bid prices from years 1 through 7 of the program. Year 7 is probably the most relevant to everybody that's on the webinar right now. Just so that you can be aware of what last year's bid prices were, or average bid prices, I apologize. The price per rec is, as I said, noted on the screen, as is the decline or increase year over year.
This is Carolina Miller from United Illuminating. So in here you can see the UI program results. In year 6, you can see that the prices in some categories went up in comparison to the average per rec year 7. We did have some going down and some going up. We have about 486 total active projects right now.
For the Year 8 RFP, there's just a few key things that we wanted to discuss. There's no real major changes, but just a few things that we wanted to raise as key points for the Year 8 RFP. There will be only one RFP. It's currently open. The bid window currently is open through June 12th of 2019. So you can log in and submit your bids now, right after the webinar, if you feel like it. New construction projects, there is the requirement, again, as was the same in year 7. The interconnection application receipt is required for any project that is new construction. The LREC ZREC price cap is set at $126 per rec. Counterparties now have the ability to obtain 2 extension requests. There's 2 6-month extensions that are written into the terms and conditions of the agreement for years 7 and 8 of the contract. If you have a contract that was pre-year 7, you still have to go to PURA if you are requesting a second extension. And just another thing that we wanted to highlight is that splitting projects is prohibited, and we'll get into that a little further down in the presentation. As previously stated, this is the same as years 6 and 7. New construction projects are projects that do not currently have a revenue meter at their site, must now submit a copy of the confirmation receipt issued by the Distributed Resources Group at their respective company, stating that an interconnection application and payment for such application have been received by the company for that specific project, and that confirmation receipt is required during the bidding process. This means that if your project is new construction, you will first have to submit and pay for an interconnection application before you submit your bid. This documentation is required at the time the bid is submitted. If a new construction bid is submitted without this paperwork, it will be disqualified as it will be deemed incomplete. Again, you will not be able to submit the paperwork after your bid is submitted. If a new construction bid is submitted without this paperwork, it will be disqualified for being incomplete. There will be no opportunity to submit the paperwork after the bid has been submitted. If multiple new construction bids are submitted at the same site address, each bid must submit its own unique confirmation receipt. The price caps are the same as year 7. The LREC price cap is $126 per rec, as is the ZREC price cap. Any bid price over those amounts in their respective categories will result in disqualification. The Eversource bid system doesn't even allow you to submit a bid over that price. Pursuant to Section 13.3.3b of the Terms and Conditions, projects that receive contracts in the year 7 and 8 RFP will now be eligible for 2 6-month extensions to the automatic termination date, which will allow a total of up to 24 months from the delivery term start date for the project to go in service. Additional performance assurance in the same amount originally posted will be required for each such extension request. As mentioned earlier, there is a specific prohibition on splitting projects. Projects must participate in the category in which their size warrants participation. Projects may not be split to qualify in smaller size tiers, meaning that a large ZREC size project may not be split to qualify as a medium and a small ZREC project, and a medium ZREC project may not be split to qualify as 2 small ZREC projects. These are specifically reiterated in Section 4.7 of the solicitation plan and Section 5.3.6 of the RFP. If there are specific questions regarding this prohibition, please submit them to lrec.zrec@eversource.com, and we will try to address them during the presentation. Or if you have a very project-specific question, please submit your question individually to the utility where you're participating or where you're submitting your bid, and we will go through your situation on an individual basis and get an answer back to you. Again, this is the same as in years 6 and 7. There's only one bid allowed to be submitted, regardless of category, meaning LREC or ZREC. Only one bid may be submitted in a given funding period. If multiple bids behind one revenue meter are received, the lowest priced bid, regardless of category, will be evaluated and all others will be disqualified. So for example, if you submit one bid as an LREC project and one bid as a ZREC project, whichever bid price is lower, and they're both at the same revenue meter, whichever bid price is lower, regardless of what category it's in, we will take that bid and we will disqualify all others. So again, only one bid per revenue meter is allowed. As is the same as in the past, again, residential applicants must first apply to the Connecticut Green Bank, and only if they receive an incentive application denied letter from the Green Bank will they be eligible to participate in the LREC ZREC program. Projects that are or will be residential, for Eversource, that's rates 1, 5, and 7. For UI, that's rates R and RT. They must first apply to the Connecticut Green Bank. Any questions regarding this should be directed to the Green Bank at smallsolar@ctgreenbank.com. Now I'll pass it over to Katarina.
As everyone knows, this is procurement process that is competitive solicitation for year 8 RFP. And here we can see respective categories for large ZREC, medium ZREC, and LREC, and the sizes as well as annual budget for both companies combined. I just would like to mention that for small ZREC, the budget is combined as a statutory budget for year 7 and year 8. Procurement process for year 8 budget for Eversource, LREC is approximately $3.2 million, large ZREC 1.06 million, medium same, and small ZREC is not applicable because that's part of the small ZREC process. UI for year 7 budget, or year 8 budget, $800,000, 266 for large and medium, and same for small ZREC. LREC and ZREC eligibility. The project must be located behind a contracting utility revenue meter and have a dedicated REC meter. Must not have received grants, rebates from Connecticut Green Bank and its predecessors, for instance, CEFIA or the CCEF, and other than low-cost financing. Project must be in service on or after July 1, 2011. Must be eligible to qualify as Class 1 renewable project. Connecticut PURA application and approval process that will be also discussed later on in this presentation. And must certify site control, 3 signatures and notary required. Please note that we actually require additional information in the certification form. LREC and ZREC eligibility. LREC no larger than 2,000 kW, must have low emissions, may include fuel cells and other low emissions Class 1 resources, as well as all zero emission Class 1 resources. ZREC no larger than 1,000 kW, must have 0 emissions, may include solar, hydro, and wind. Request for proposal, RFP. RFP covers LREC projects and ZREC projects that are larger than 100 kW. As we know, the less than 100 kW, those are small ZREC projects and are not covered in this RFP. The year 7 small ZREC program is still open for both companies, as Laura mentioned earlier, open to customers and developers. Projects will be selected and utilities will enter into 15-year contracts to purchase the ZREC and LREC from selected projects. Key program documents, RFP, standard contract, solicitation plan, fair decision, docket 11-1206, question and answers. These all are updated respectively on each utility company's website. Year 8 RFP schedule. In here you can see schedule. Both of the companies sent out notification emails that the release of RFP was on April 30th, 2019. we notify all of the selections, and any notification goes out via email. The winners, the winning bidders, they will be also notified via email. It is really important that the emails in the application is correct. Please make sure that you verify that information, because that will be our way to communicate if we need any additional information, if any additional documents are required. All of the notification will be sent via email. So please make sure that you have correct email address in your application. Quantity and value of RECs, and here you can see all of the calculations and how do we arrive in the payments. For example, 200 kW solar system, it's 311 RECs per year. Annual payment is $24,880. If it's $80 per REC, you multiply by 311, then it will arrive $24,880. The total payment over 15 years will be $373,000. You can also see the other calculations below on the slide. And I will hand it over to Laura.
I will discuss the bidding process, and I'm actually going to handle Aaron's part this morning to discuss the post-contract execution process. The first step is submitting a bid in the Year 8 RFP. To submit a bid for the RFP, you must complete and submit the bid forms available on our respective websites as shown on the screen. There are certifications, affidavits, and disclosures that may be required depending on the specifics of your project or bid. The bid certification form is mandatory for all bids, and it's 4 pages long. The first page is instructions. The next 3 following pages are what needs to actually be filled out. This must be completed and submitted as a single PDF at the time of bid submission. The Connecticut Licensed Professional Engineer certification is only required if you choose to enter a different average annual production than the one that's automatically calculated during the bid process. If you do so, it must be supported by a calculation approved by Connecticut Licensed Professional Engineer, and the approved calculation must be submitted as a PDF at the time of bid submission. If the project or any other project at the same site have applied for or received any Connecticut Green Bank, CEFIA, or CCEF grants or rebates, a written description must also be attached to the bid. The respective company's online bidding systems will acknowledge the receipt of each bid. The Eversource bid form is filled out online. It contains information needed for the verification of information submitted, along with all the information that's input directly into any resulting contract. As previously stated, the bid certification form is required with every bid, and additional certifications, affidavits, or disclosures may be required as well, depending on the specifics of the bid. We strongly suggest that you double and triple check the information being submitted for all bids to avoid errors, which may invalidate the bid, and to avoid errors on any resulting contract. The UI bid form is available online and must be submitted electronically. The bid certification form is required with every bid, and additional certifications, affidavits, or disclosures may be required as well, depending on the specifics of the bid. These forms are required as an attachment to page 5 of the online bid, and the bid ID assigned to the user must be noted on these forms. The bid certification form is a 4-page document and requires 3 signatures. Page 1 is instructions. Page 2 requires the signature of the bidder. The bidder is the individual or business who is typing the information into the online bid form. Page 3 requires the signature of the contract counterparty. This is the legal entity entering into the standard contract, otherwise known as the seller. Page 4 requires the signature of the owner of the project site. This signature must be witnessed by a notary public and documented as such. The form must be submitted as one single PDF at the time of bid submission. And please note that the individuals or businesses who sign each page of these forms must correspond exactly with the information typed into the online bid form. The bidder, counterparty, and owner of the project site that are listed on the form and ultimately sign the form must match exactly to the information that's typed into the online bid. If your project meets the Connecticut Manufactured, Researched, or Developed definition as outlined in Section 2.4.4.3 of the RFP, 2 affidavits are required. The bidder affidavit, the first one is the bidder affidavit that the project is using Connecticut Manufactured, Researched, or Developed generation technologies. This must constitute no less than 50% of the total value of generation technology to be used by the project. And the second is the technology supplier's affidavit that it supplies Connecticut Manufactured, Researched, or Developed technologies. Both of these forms must be filled out completely and submitted at the time of bid submission. If the project meets the Connecticut Manufactured, Researched, and Developed definition, the submission of both of these affidavits will result in the bid for the project being discounted by 10% for evaluation purposes only. For example, a $100 bid for a project that meets the in-state criteria would be evaluated using a bid price of $90. However, the seller would still receive $100 per REC under the contract if selected for a contract. The company's bid forms automatically calculate the average annual production of a project based on the project size and the capacity factors from the most recent Connecticut Integrated Resource Plan. However, if a bidder wishes to use an alternate capacity factor than the ones from the Connecticut IRP, the bidder may choose to submit a Connecticut Licensed Professional Engineer certification. Additionally, a PE certification is required if the bidder is using a technology that does not have a defined capacity factor in the IRP, or if the bid combines multiple technologies. The most recent IRP does include capacity factors for single-axis and dual-axis tracking solar systems. So those are now available as an option when you're submitting a bid to the companies. The same as last year, pages 1 and 2 of the Eversource customer bill are now required as an attachment to all Eversource bids that are not new construction. And this is attached during step 6 of the online bid process. UI also requires that pages 1 and 2 of the customer bill be submitted with each bid that is not designated as new construction. As stated earlier, all new construction projects are required to submit a copy of the confirmation receipt issued by the Distributed Resources Group at the respective company, stating that an interconnection application and payment for such application have been received by Eversource for that specific project during step 6 of the bidding process. On the screen is an example of what such documentation may look like from Eversource. UI has the same requirement for new construction projects, and documentation will also be required to be submitted at the time that the bid is submitted. To select bids for each category, the companies rank the bids from lowest to highest evaluated bid price, and we will award contracts until our budget for that category is committed. Any project that is not awarded a contract in the initial selection round will be placed on the standby queue, and if funding becomes available due to projects terminating or choosing not to execute the contract, it will be allocated to the next bid in the standby queue for that category until the budget is committed. Bids in the standby queue expire when the companies file their respective final procurement plans. If your bid is selected, the first step is executing the contract and providing performance assurance. The contract will be sent via email to the bid contact and the alternate bid contact as specified on the bid form at submittal, and it is due back, signed by the contract counterparty with the delivery term start date selected by the due date. Otherwise, the bid will be disqualified. Performance assurance is also due at the same time as the partially executed contract. The amount of performance assurance required will be listed in section 9.1 of the cover sheet. And if performance assurance is not received by the due date, the contract will automatically terminate. Just a reminder that performance assurance is not required if the project is in service at the time of bid submission. The amount of performance assurance required varies based on the category and the project size. Medium ZREC performance assurance is 10% of the first year's revenue. Large ZREC and LREC performance assurance is 20% of the first year's projected revenue. Example 1 is for a 175 kW medium solar project, which will produce 273 RECs per year. And at a bid price of $80 per REC, this results in a performance assurance requirement of $2,184. Example 2 is for a 600 kW large ZREC project, which will produce 933 RECs per year, and at a bid price of $65 per REC, this results in a performance assurance requirement of $12,129. Example 3 is for a 1 megawatt fuel cell, which will produce 8,279 RECs per year, and at a bid price of $40 per REC, this results in performance assurance of $66,232. Both companies have posted detailed instructions for how to successfully provide performance assurance on their respective websites. Acceptable forms of performance assurance are cash in the form of an ACH or wire. Please note that ACH payments take longer to process than wire transfers, and please plan accordingly to ensure that the company receives the payment on or before the due date. A bank check or cashier's check is also acceptable. However, personal and business checks are not acceptable under any circumstances. Also, surety bonds and letters of credit are no longer accepted by the companies as performance assurance.
This is Carolina from UI. I just wanted to add that the password, please read the bid instructions because the password for the portal is in the instructions.
Now, once you receive a contract and have executed it, there are certain steps that must be completed in order to begin receiving payments for the RECs your project will produce. You will need to complete and sign the certification statement for REC delivery acceptance, and this will include the list of items you see on the slide. First and foremost, the project needs to be in service no later than 1 year after the pre-selected delivery term start date. You have up to 18 or 24 months if you request and receive the 1 or 2 extensions that are now allowed under the terms and conditions. You will need an interconnection agreement, which you obtain from our distributed resources group. You will also need to apply for and obtain Class 1 approval for your renewable project, and that's done through PURA. You will need to register your project with NEPL GIS, and you will need to have a dedicated REC meter installed and validated. This process will be discussed in more detail later in the presentation. If the project is not expected to achieve commercial operation within 12 months of the selected delivery term start date, you now have the option to request a 6-month extension to the automatic termination provision, allowing 18 months beyond the delivery term start date for the project to achieve achieve commercial operation. You also have the option to request an additional 6 months, allowing 24 months beyond the delivery term start date for the project to achieve commercial operation. The extension request must be provided to the companies in accordance with Article 14 of the Terms and Conditions of the Agreement, and the request, along with the additional performance assurance, must be received prior to the automatic termination date of the agreement. Eversource has created an extension request template, and this is available on the Resources and Administration portion of our website or via the link in the presentation. This chart explains the automatic termination dates and the dates on which the extension request and additional performance assurance are required in order to secure a 6-month extension. Please also be aware that if the date falls on a weekend or a holiday, the extension request and performance assurance are due on the last business day before the date noted. This chart explains the automatic termination dates and the dates on which extension requests and additional performance assurance are required in order to secure an additional 6-month extension. To go into a bit more detail regarding the PURA Class 1 requirement, Section 5.1.5 of the Terms and Conditions states that it is the responsibility of the seller to obtain PURA Class 1 approval. PURA requires you to submit to them a separate application from the one submitted to the EDC. You may find that application on their website by following the link included on the slide. PURA requires you to have your final approval to energize from our interconnection group before you apply for Class 1 designation. Once the Class 1 designation is obtained, you must submit the final decision to the buyer on the contract and to NEPL GIS, the buyer on the contract being either UI or Eversource. A copy of your PURA application and receipt from PURA may be submitted to the EDC if the final decision isn't obtained before the automatic termination date. Each project is also required to register with NEPL GIS as a generator. After registering, NEPL will select the proper buyer as the third-party meter reader of record for you. You must then set up a forward certificate transfer for the life of the service agreement. This allows the REC to be sent to the seller automatically for purchase on a quarterly basis. Rules and instructions for this project can be found on the NEPL GIS website and via the links on the slide. If the seller does not complete the aforementioned steps, there may be a loss of revenue, as the life of the contract is 15 years, beginning on the delivery term start date, whether or not the requirements have been fulfilled for the buyer to begin purchasing RECs or not. If you are not in service by your delivery term start date that's selected on the agreement, then it may result in a loss of revenue for the seller. The contract may also be terminated if the necessary requirements are not provided to the buyer by the automatic termination date, which is 1 year after the delivery term start date, or it could be 18 months or 24 months if you receive the first or second extension. Termination of the contract results in the loss of performance assurance, the loss of the contract value, and you are not allowed to submit bids in future rounds of the ZREC program if you have a terminated contract at that revenue meter. After completing and submitting all the previously mentioned requirements to the company, you will receive an acknowledgement letter from the buyer that includes a REC delivery acceptance date. The REC delivery acceptance date is the date on which we will begin purchasing RECs from your project. This letter verifies that we have received all of the required information from you and informs you of the date from which we will begin to purchase RECs created by the project. If you have not received this letter from the buyer, you likely still have outstanding items for completion, and you will not begin receiving payments until you receive this letter. To go into a little more detail regarding how we administer the contract lasts for 15 years and begins promptly on the delivery term start date selected by the buyer at the time of contract execution. The payment rate per REC which you bid remains static for the entire contract term. Based on the REC delivery acceptance date, the buyer will upload the REC meter data and the NEPOOL, will upload the REC meter data to NEPOOL on a quarterly basis. After the REC meter data is uploaded to NEPOOL, RECs are created and they are put into the seller's account. The previously established forward certificate transfer will then move the RECs to the buyer's account automatically, and payment for the RECs will occur by the end of the following month after the buyer receives the RECs. That's a long way of saying that once you sign up for NEPOOL and you have done so properly, the system just automatically works. We upload your REC meter reads, they go into your account, and then they are automatically sent back to ours. That's the purpose of the forward certificate transfer and the beauty of it.
And problem, if the forward certificate transfer is not set up, it's a prerequisite for purchase, it's listed in the contract as a requirement, and the necessity for the companies to receive the product that they're buying. Absent of setting up a forward certificate transfer can result in us not purchasing any and not having the ability to transfer them, purchase them, because they're never transferred to us. And so they need to be set up via forward certificate transfer.
Eversource will not issue the REC delivery acceptance date or REC delivery acceptance letter until you've completed that step. So if you don't complete the NEPOOL GIS steps properly, we will not issue your REC delivery acceptance date until you do so.
But you are available to assist the process if people have questions, or NEPOOL GIS has a 1-800 number and an Ask NEPOOL chat line in case there are questions setting that up.
Yes, and they're very, very helpful and very responsive.
Correct.
This is a visual display of what happens during the meter data upload process. Moving from left to right, you can see that the utility reads the REC meter, and uploads the data to NEPOOL. The RECs are created and deposited into the seller's account, where they are then transferred to the buyer's account via forward certificate transfer. Once the buyer verifies the RECs are correct and the correct amount, they will initiate payment to the seller. The table on the screen shows a schedule of when we upload meter data, when RECs are created, and when payments are sent out by. You can see there's a lag between when we read the REC meter and when we upload the REC meter data. The reason for this is because we allow sellers as much time as possible to submit REC delivery acceptance documentation, and this is also just a delay that the NEPOOL GIS schedule has created, essentially. There are a few other contract provisions that we would just like to mention briefly. The first is that the contract can be assigned in accordance with Article 11. All required documentation related to assignments can be found on the company website. We ask that you visit the website and use the forms found there, as they can change from time to time. I will note that Eversource in particular, due to the change in staff, we have modified those documents. So if you are planning on completing assignments for any of your projects at all, please just use the ones that are current on the website. They're on the resources and administration portion of the Eversource website. Once the assignment documentation is submitted, the buyer has 30 days to review and approve or reject the assignment. Also, if your project produces RECs that exceed the maximum annual quantity that's noted on the contract, one of the options is selling the RECs to a third party other than the buyer on the service agreement. And the second option is to bank the RECs toward the next year's maximum annual quantity. I will say that most people tend to choose the bank option. However, if you know that your project is going to produce extra over your maximum annual quantity, and you do wish for us to send them back to you, you must notify us in accordance with the terms and conditions that you want us to do so. For Eversource customers, you may now register to view your REC meter reads online. If you would like to request to view REC meter reads for a given project, please return the completed request to view REC meter reads form to lrec.zrec@eversource.com. To view REC meter reads, you will need to click the View REC meter reads button at the top, at the bottom of the Resources and Administration portion of our website. You will use the login information submitted on the form above. Your user ID can be the same as an existing Eversource ID or the ID you use to submit REC bids and applications. You also have the option of creating a new user ID by clicking Register Now on the login page. Once logged in, you will click the View REC meter reads for your project button, and information for all projects where you are listed as an approved user will appear in this list. You will need to click the arrow to the left of the project you wish to view information for, shown on the next slide. This is an example of what the REC meter reads page looks like. So the little arrow that we're talking about is very small, but you can see what we're talking about when we mean click on the arrow to view the REC meter reads for your project. Please submit questions or requests to be added to our distribution list to lrec.zrec@eversource.com or for UI, lrec.zrec@uinet.com. Please also visit our LREC ZREC website. Those are listed on the screen. This is a screenshot of the Eversource Renewable Energy Credit website. The arrow shows where you can submit a bid, access our resources page, or find general information on the program. And this is a screenshot of UI's webpage, and where you can find current information for the Year 8 RFP. In just 1 second, I will pass it over to James Serkanowicz, who will discuss the generator interconnection process.
Thank you very much, Laura. So the generator interconnection process, not really anything that has changed from what you used to see in this, but I'll go through the slides one by one. So going on to the next page, the guidelines obviously are cloud record over the last 10 years, and they are approved by the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority Bureau, and are based on the FERC guidelines. Next slide. So the purpose of these is essentially to make sure that you can reliably connect to the grid, to identify if there are any impacts on the grid, and help you identify if there are any costs related to the connection to the grid. Next slide. Retracts, since the changes a few years ago, we have now elevated the simplified process, or level 1 is what I call it, to anything that is residential, single phase, certified inverter based, up to 20 kilowatts, where previously that had been 10. And then anything that does not fall into that limited category then falls into the fast track process. So anything that is commercial, anything that is 3-phase, even if it's under 20 kilowatts, would fall into this fast track category. Then obviously all generators over 20 kilowatts automatically fall into this category as well. Projects that are not eligible for the simplified process, and then anything over the 2 megawatt threshold automatically goes through to the impact study process. Next slide. So again, for the level 1 category, there is a $200 application fee. Again, the 0 to 20 kilowatts for projects that are residential, single phase, inverter based. We no longer require liability insurance to be provided, and we no longer require the execution of an interconnection agreement. So most of these reviews go through fairly smoothly. but all the same technical requirements, as always been the case, are still evaluated for the project. Next slide. So the simplified process timeline, we receive the application, and within 3 business days, you should get notified of the receipt of the application. We have up to 10 business days to indicate if the materials that were submitted are complete and meet the minimum requirements for review. If they do, we then move it ahead to the technical review process, which can take up to 15 business days total. We certainly try to turn those around in much less time than that. And in the case of Eversource, with our new Power Clerk system, we are typically able to, within the first day of reviewing, determine if it has, in many cases, passed our automated review process, or if it requires further evaluation by our engineers. And if it does pass the technical review process, again, within 15 business days, you'll see that contingent approval. In the case of Eversource, we do typically waive for all contractors that have at least 3 successful commissioning tests with us. We waive the requirement to have a witness test, and will simply allow you to interconnect once you have a town inspection approval and successful change out of your billing meter to a net meter. Again, the application fee for this is $200, and the basic requirements of a complete 1-line diagram, layout plan. We do not require inverter data sheets anymore for Eversource, because with our Power Clerk system, you can only select inverters that meet the current UL 1741 SA certification. So that is the new smart inverter settings and the new IEEE standards as well. And in the case of Eversource as well, we also will only allow the signed application to either be an e-signature through the Power Clerk system, or if you create a PDF of the Power Clerk application and then have the customer sign that and upload it. We no longer accept signed applications from the PDF version that are in the guidelines. Again, it must be a signature, either be an e-signature request from Power Clerk, or it must be a signature on the Power Clerk version of the application. Again, once you navigate your way through the process and you have everything completed, sound inspection and a net meter change, we will then issue the approval of energy system. Next slide. So this is again an overall map of the interconnection process. Again, no changes from anything that you've seen in the past year as far as the timelines go, as far as the workflow, where if it needs to go through a study process versus if it can go through the simple fast track process and be approved and have an interconnection agreement issued. Next slide. So again, the fast track process is a $500 application fee. Same timelines as with the simplified process, and still we will receive the application, review it for completeness. If acceptable, send it through the technical review phase, which can take 15 business days. And if it passes, we will then, at the conclusion, that issue a contingent approval and interconnection agreement. You do still need to provide general liability coverage, proof of insurance, and again, that's for the customer, not the contractor. All of this is based on the Eversource or UI customer record, regardless of whether or not the system is owned by a third party, whether or not the customer record owns the system or not. That is who we need proof of insurance for. So again, this process covers projects up to 2 megawatts, and we will, in case of projects that are over 1 megawatt, assist with the ISO New England notification form of the PP5 program, as it's sometimes known. We will assist with getting those forms completed and into ISO New England for their review procedures. Next slide. So again, just a further outline of the timelines for this process: 3 business days for review, for notification that we've received the application, and 10 days to determine if the application is complete, 15 business days to review for technical standards, and again, if it passes, issue a contingent approval with an interconnection agreement. The interconnection agreement, again, must be signed by the Eversource customer of record, regardless of who owns the system. And then we simply wait for you to build the system and have it inspected by the town. And then we move on to the witness test process, and that is where you have to provide a fee in advance for the witness test, and we will always outline what that fee is. It is on a per project basis, depending on the complexity as to what we will charge for that test. And you also need to provide the test procedure for review approval. So once we complete a successful commissioning test, and again, a net meter change if necessary, we will then issue the approval of Energize. If it does not pass the fast track review process, that is when we refer to the impact study process. Again, those impact studies, the complexity of those depends on the complexity of the project and depends on, and the cost as well depends on the complexity of the study that has to be undertaken. Next slide. So then we get into the study process. So any project that is over 2 megawatts, that is a $1,000 application fee as opposed to the other fast track projects that are a $500 application fee. And again, these would go straight to needing an impact study, cost-based, scope-based, depending on the complexity of the project. So again, this applies to all projects over 2 megawatts, but under 20 megawatts, anything that is not utilizing a certified inverter, and anything under 2 megawatts that had failed the fast track process. And transmission studies are required for projects over 5 megawatts. Next slide, again. Study approval process, the timelines that you see on this slide are general timelines. Feasibility studies, impact studies, facility studies, it does indicate 30 days for each. However, those timelines can be extended to longer depending on the size and the complexity of the project. So you'll need to refer to the individual agreements that are issued for any of these studies. Next slide. So again, what is the key to a successful interconnection? Well, number one, read the guidelines and understand them. Two, complete the application in full. The application must be signed by the customer of record in projects that are in the fast track process or study process, the correct insurance. Again, technical data sheets, we're not as strict about that anymore, at least for Eversource, because we know that if you are submitting through PowerClerk, you must now select inverters that are certified and carry the most recent certifications. Again, accurate utility numbers and meter numbers. I can't stress enough that before you submit an application to Eversource utilizing PowerClerk system, that you have a copy of the most recent bill. Do not try utilizing a bill that is 6 months or a year old, as quite often meter numbers can change, billing account numbers can change, and the other control factor with PowerClerk is that we utilize 3 pieces of data to pull from our billing system that, besides the billing account number and the meter number, we utilize the mailing address zip code, not the site address. So if the bill is being mailed somewhere else, it's that zip code, and that is why you need to make sure you have a copy of the customer's utility bill.
The same pertains for bills submitted with the application. Please submit the most recent bill, because as James mentioned earlier, the information change, account can change, meter can change, so we need to have the most recent bill with the application. Otherwise, the bill will not be accepted.
I was going to reiterate the same thing. Again, as Katerina said, a copy of the utility bill is now required to be submitted along with your bid. So just like James and the interconnection groups that the companies require that you submit the most recent utility bill, please use the most recent utility bill when you're submitting your application or your bid to us as well.
Thank you. And again, with the PowerClerk system, when you put in those 3 pieces of information, then you have a little button where you're connecting behind an existing meter that says retrieve customer information. If you put in those 3 pieces of information and you get an error message, don't assume the error is on the PowerClerk side, assume it's on your side. Our system is very, very accurate, and quite often the pitfalls I see are, again, either an old billing account number that has changed, an old meter number that has changed, only putting in 8 digits for a meter because you're reading off of the faceplate of the meter where the meters are 9 digits. And again, trying to utilize the site address zip code as opposed to the billing address zip code. And for that, it is just the first few digits of the zip code. It's not the dash and then 4-digit extension. It's simply the first set of numbers in a zip code. So again, ownership. There is a spot now on the PowerClerk system where you can indicate who the owner of the system is. While we do receive that information, just be aware again that we tend to just keep these as strict 2-party interconnection agreements between Eversource and the Eversource customers.
And James, just a question where you mentioned the 6-digit versus 9-digit on the meter. How would someone know what the additional digits would be?
So again, the 8 digits meters, typically I know the display, if you're going off making a field visit and reading the actual meter, the large print numbers are the first 8 digits, and often it's that last 9th digit that's left off, which typically is 1 or 2, and I believe on most meters, You will see it in smaller text below the readout screen or right around the barcode. But again, if you are going off the most recent utility bill, that will display all 9 digits. It's just when you're reading off the physical meter in the field that a lot of times the mistake that's made is only inputting the first 8 digits and leaving off that last digit.
Thank you.
Sure. So on to the next slide. So again, the Exhibit B of the guidelines are what the technical requirements are for all the fast track projects. Please make sure that you're referring to the most recent version, which I believe was last updated in 2018. And most importantly is Appendix C in that Exhibit B of the technical requirements has what the most recent settings requirements are for inverters based on the UL 7041 SA and latest IEEE ISO New England ride-through settings. So if you are showing settings for inverters on your line diagrams, please make sure that they are matching what is in Appendix C of the technical requirement. That is the most current and the required standard now for all SA certified and all inverters that meet the new IEEE ride-through settings. So please, again, make sure that if you're putting settings of your inverters on the line diagrams, that it matches that standard. So again, timely communicate a line diagram that is clear is very important for interconnection, and then obviously as well for the ZREC meter review. Even though interconnection review process and ZREC is two separate independent processes, they are often occurring concurrently. So in the case of Eversource, when we're reviewing for interconnection, most often you're already displaying a REC meter on the site plan and on the line diagram. So at the same time that we are requesting our meter engineering group review the billing meter for potential net meter change in compliance with the interconnection guidelines, we're typically concurrently requesting that they review the line diagram and the site plan for compliance with the REC meter standards. So making sure that you're clearly displaying the REC meter and that you're identifying it as the ZREC meter as opposed to as a production meter or such as a locus meter helps us keep those two separate and clear. And again, showing on the line diagram that you're going to install the meter exterior ground level just as is required for the AC disconnect is important, since the majority of the REC meters will be high-powered ERT meters that have a radio frequency that needs to be picked up by our drive-by band. That is why we require that the exterior ground level for the case of Eversource. So again, you will see contingent approval prior to construction. You want to make sure you have that required AC disconnect switch. You need to make sure you're complying with all meter and service requirements. So again, in the case of Eversource, it's not just the latest electrical code requirements. It's also making sure you're compliant with the Eversource INR manual. In the case of more complex projects, you would have to have a detailed sequence of operations. And for all solar projects, a very basic test plan. Again, nothing complicated. It's a typical testing for loss of grid power to make sure the inverters per their certification shut down in 2 seconds or less, and take at least 5 minutes to start up upon grid restoration. And then as well, making sure that they do not operate when there's a loss of a single phase in the case of 3-phase projects. And lastly, that the settings match, again, those latest requirements as outlined in Appendix C of the technical requirements. And again, as well, for larger projects that require redundant relays, making sure that you provided all the information required. Next slide is just a basic cover view of the 2 relevant guidelines, the fast track and study process, and the 20K under simplified process. Again, these are the shots of the paper versions. In the case of Eversource, do not be utilizing the application forms that are in here. We require that you utilize the Power Clerk system going forward. And again, here are the general contact email addresses if you have any questions for Eversource or UI regarding the connection.
With that, we're going to pause for a second and go over a few questions that we've received. One of the questions was, will there be a rollover of funds from year 7 to the year 8 RFP? The answer is yes. Pursuant to the authority's February 8th, 2019 decision on motion number 3 in docket 180810, the remaining funds from LREC, large ZREC, and medium ZREC from year 7 will be rolled into their respective category in the year 8 RFP. Those specific numbers are included in our year 7 final procurement plan filings for each of the companies. I have Eversources up on the screen, so I'll go through those specifically, but for UI, I don't know that they'll be able to provide that information right here, right now. So for Eversource, roughly $500,000 will be rolled from year 7 to year 8 LREC. For large ZREC, roughly $90,000 will be rolled from large ZREC from year 7 into the year 8 budget. And for medium ZREC, roughly $35,000 will be rolled into the year 8 medium ZREC budget. So it's also important to note that the budgets that you saw previously on the screens, those are just the base statutory budgets, and they will always be larger than that because any contracts that terminate or any contracts that install smaller than their original contracted value, those funds are then reallocated to the next available year. So again, the numbers that you saw previously are just the statutory budgets, and they will increase by at least the numbers that I just stated. Again, I'll reiterate that the specific numbers, the specific budget amounts that will be rolled over from year 7 to year 8 are included in the filing of the final procurement plan for each of the companies, which is available on PURA's website under docket 11-1206. And also a link to Eversources is available on our website as well.
So for United Illuminating, we don't have the filed solicitation plan, or procurement plan, excuse me. Solicitation. Sorry, backwards. For the year 7 at the moment, but again, they are available in the docket 11-1206. And did we receive approval of it? We did.
Yeah, we did.
So we received approval. United Illuminating and Eversource received approval of those plans, and that outlines the rollover dollars that were available from year 7 that will go into year 8. The slide that talks about the budget, again, is the statutory required budget for United Illuminating and Eversource. So you would take the amount that's available from the year 7 rollover, add it to the statutory budget. Then there's always a differential between any contracts that have terminated or have built smaller. We've been notified of that prior to the closure of the issues there. So that is the answer to the budget.
Another question we received was regarding banking recs. Just to clarify the banking recs provision in the contract, if you bank recs, they apply to your next contract year. With that being said, if you consistently overproduce, they're going to keep rolling over from year to year to year. So while you can't say I produced 5 extra recs in year 1 and I want to save them until year 7 when I significantly underproduce, you can't do that. They can only roll from one contract year to the very next contract year. But again, just because of the nature of that system, if you keep consistently overproducing, you're going to keep rolling recs over, should you choose to do so, from year over year.
Correct. And there will come a time closer to the end of the term of the project, if you have consistently rolled over, there'll be no additional year to roll over. And I can't give you a specific example of that because I don't, we haven't gotten to year 15 or 14 on the contract yet, but depending on how you overproduce, there certainly will become a time where Eversource and United Illuminating will no longer allow you to roll them over because they won't be able to roll over. And you will have to have the recs returned to you and decide how you want to monetize those.
Correct. We received another question regarding updates to the virtual net metering budget. We do not have any updates to the virtual net metering budget or the virtual net metering program at all. Those slides are actually included at the end of this presentation just as for your information, for reference only. They will not be discussed during today's presentation because there is no update to that program or to those budgets at this time. Thank you all for your questions. If there's anything else that's not project specific or that's just a general Q&A, please again feel free to send them to LREC.ZREC@eversource.com. We are going to go into the metering portion of the presentation.
I can do it if you want. Greg asked if I would do it. So.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he sent me.
Okay, so James will be covering the rec metering requirements for Eversource, and I will note that this is a very important part of the presentation because there are some things that have changed, and so please pay close attention to this portion from Eversource's perspective.
Thank you. All right, so again, I'm covering for Greg Piven on behalf of the Eversource portion of the presentation. So on to the next slide. So contact information is obviously important. Approval of the approved REC meter cable, please refer to that in the metering guidelines. We're going to discuss self-contained REC metering circuits, instrument-rated metering REC service, high-end REC metering circuits, and the REC meter validation form. On to the next slide. So again, please refer to the MP-REC document that is located on the webpage. And for Eversource, if you have any questions regarding metering configurations, please email meterengineering@eversource.com. Next slide. So the main change that you're going to see here to this form is when you look at the different categories of meter and the size thresholds. Previously, anything in excess of 500 kW was required to go into Group B. That is, that it would require an ion meter. We are now allowing, we've now raised that threshold where anything greater than or equal to 1 megawatt will require that it have, being Group B, that is, that it have an ion 8650C meter. Now the projects that fall in the 500 kW to 1 megawatt range, we will now, they will need to be an interval recording meter, but not necessarily an ion meter. So again, the difference being that you will now only have to procure a ion meter on your own for projects greater than or equal to 1 megawatt. Projects up to 1 megawatt, we will recommend as the lowest cost solution the purchase of an interval recording meter for those that fall into the 500 kW to 1 megawatt range. And so that should be a significant cost savings for you, and should just be for us an ease of programming with regard to meters and with reading data as well. So again, you see the normal recommendation that we've always made, and that is as far as lowest cost solution being a scalar meter that utilizes high powered ERT technology. So those scalar meters will give you a reading once a month, and that's for anything up to the 500 kW range. Then after that, from 500 to 1 megawatt, would require interval recording data, and the different meter type configurations depending on the service voltages between the self-contained versions, such as the 2S and the 16S, as is most common, onto the CT-based metering or instrument-rated metering, and that is again typically the 9S metering. We will require VTs for anything that is 40 volts. Anything that is 122.8 volts, however, for the three-phase will simply require the CTs, because our self-contained meters are rated up to 320 amps. Anything exceeding 320 amps is when it bumps up from being the self-contained type of meter socket to being instrument rating and needing separate CTs. And that again is typically the 9S configuration. In the case of three-phase meters, the 4S configuration most commonly in terms of single-phase meters. On to the next slide. So again, single phase 12240, typically, most typically you're talking Form 2S configurations, 3-wire, either class 200 or class 320. Again, if you're getting into the 3-phase projects, 122.8 or 277.480, most commonly we're talking about a Form 16S self-contained meter. And again, we have class 200 and class 320 meters, so anything up to 320 amps can be these self-contained configurations. So you will again work through a DG project manager such as myself to purchase and procure these meters from Eversource. So again, if you have all the metering information clearly identified on your site line diagram, we will make sure that review is done by meter engineering concurrent with the interconnection review. And if the design is approvable, we will then indicate what the cost is, and we will recommend the lowest cost solution unless requested otherwise. And we will indicate the typical costs, again, which are usually for self-contained meters, $208. Excuse me. For three-phase meters, $266 typically for these self-contained meters. And again, if you require, and this is actually the same price when we get into the 9S meters as well, and even the 4S, it's only when we get into the interval recording meters that we get into a more expensive type of setup. And again, the REC meters must be placed outside of the building exterior ground level, 24/7 accessible, so that if we have issues with reading or needs to be serviced, we have the ability to get to these. So again, the three-line drawing, this is the thing that's highlighted in yellow that you want to pay close attention to. Typically, we had asked in the past that self-contained meters will be wired, the line top side coming from the inverters and the load or bottom side going towards the Eversource grid. We are now reversing that. So now we want wired top side coming from the main switch side, and we want the inverter feed coming in the bottom side of the inverter. That is a switch now strictly for the year, whatever we got to, 7? Okay.
No, this is year 8.
Year 8, okay, my apologies, I've lost track here. So this is strictly a change for year 8 contracts. If you have a year 6, 7 contract you are finishing up on, that is still per the old standard, which was reversed. We are trying to, I believe this change is made to be more in line with the industry and as well with the Mass Smart program, so that hopefully installers should get more used to a unified way. So again, this is strictly for the new year 8 that we are now saying that the bottom or the load side is where you're feeding inverters and the line or top side is going out toward the grid. So again, your site plan must clearly show the meter outside at ground level and if possible facing the streets so that our drive-by vans can pick up that high-powered radio frequency as easily as possible. Next slide. So again, this slide is just a little bit of a depiction again of what we talked about, and that is the change where now we would like to see the inverters or these self-contained meters fed from the bottom side of the socket and then coming out to the line or top side going towards the AC disconnect switch and then to ultimately to the point of connection. And another important point is our meter engineer group is stressing that they would like to see the ZREC meter located behind the AC disconnect switch, so that if you open the AC disconnect switch, you're not just disconnecting the inverters, but you're also killing the potential grid power to the ZREC meter in case there's a need to work on that. Next slide. Now we're into the the instrument rated single and 3-phase. So again, with single phase projects, 122 40 volts, typically that's a form 4S. 3-wire class 20. In the case of 3-phase, you're talking 122A or 277 480 is a form 9S, 4-wire Y class 20. We are required voltage transformers for all 277 480 services, again, typically with a ratio of 2.4 to 1. Again, this is required for all the integrated sequencings for all projects where the amperage generated by the solar is greater than 320 amps. So in this case, you're required to purchase and install the socket test switch and either a 6-terminal base socket or a 13-terminal socket. The CTs that you must purchase have to meet a 0.3% accuracy standard at full load, lowest ratio and highest rating factor possible. These must be single ratio solid core, no split core, no variable ratio. You have to verify that the metering current transformer shunts are in open position. And again, if you, for the costs of these, you work through someone like myself, a DG project manager, and we will typically tell you in our contingent approval letter what the cost is of the meter and if there are any outstanding requirements that still have to be met. And again, for these instrument rated projects, typically that outstanding requirement is in addition to showing the proper CT and VT ratio on the line diagram and showing the polarity markings, which we'll get to in a second. You do have to provide data sheets for the proposed CTs and VTs that you plan to utilize so that it can be reviewed and approved by Eversource Meter Engineering. Now on to the change. 3-line drawing does have to show, again, the current and voltage ratios clearly marked, and they have now, I guess, changed the polarity marking direction for the CTs. So now the current transformer polarity markings must be pointing towards the Eversource grid. I believe this must be a change of the title, where previously the polarity markings were pointing towards the generation. Now they would like the current transformer polarity markings pointing towards the grid. Again, you'll have to provide the cut sheets for the CTs and VTs for review and approval. Please try to provide them earlier than later so that if there's a lead time of ordering them, you give enough time for Eversource Meter Engineering to review and approve those prior to your ordering materials. Again, outside ground level must be the location for these meters. And in the case of Ethernet meters, we're going to require a static public IP address, gateway, and subnet mask. Don't know what that means because it's not a communication tag. But make sure you get it right. Again, on to the next slide is where you'll see, again, just a general depiction of a typical line diagram showing how you should be wiring the IT-rated, instrument-rated socket. So again, the change there being that the polarity markings on the CTs are now facing the grid, where previously it was the other way around. Just a quick side note too as well. When putting together line diagrams, and this is probably more of an interconnection thing than a ZREC thing, the depiction of the existing service and the existing meter is supposed to match what the existing condition is at the site. So the common mistake that I've seen, and we'll see our meter engineering group reject drawings for, is if you were showing a IT-rated Eversource billing meter in a hot sequence configuration. Please make sure that you've gone out and done an accurate site visit to depict the existing service correctly. That is, again, one of the more common things is drawing something that is a assumption on service and metering configuration as opposed to an accurate depiction of the existing condition. So, quick side note there. To the next slide. So again, when we get into the higher end metering where we need interval recording data, and in the case of projects now over 1 megawatt or projects, certain projects will require the ION 8650C meters. So again, it's anyone that are utilizing natural gas generators that are exceeding 1 megawatt, and if they generate 650 kW at a site and it has different types of generation where it exceeds 1 megawatt, that's when we will require these higher end meters. So in those cases, again, 3 current, 3 voltage transformers preferred. You have to purchase the terminal socket, same requirements as far as the accuracy of the CTs and that they be solid core single ratio. Same thing with chunk trips. Same thing for the preferences on what it has to, and the requirements for what the drawings have to show as far as the generator size, voltages, current and voltage transformer ratios accurately marked, polarity markings correct, providing us with current TT and VT data sheets. And then in the case of the IN 8650C meters that you purchased, providing us the serial number and then providing that required communications information again, the IP address, the subway, subnet mask, and the gateway. And I know these have to be static IP addresses. On to the next slide. So validation requirements after you have the meter in place and operating, please follow the attachments at the end of the metering guidelines, which requires that you fill out that form, verify that you've taken readings off the meter on the different display channels, and once you fill out and complete that form, send it into meterengineering@eversource.com for them to review the validation. When they review and approve the validation, they will send an email back. They will be sending that email to the email address listed on the approved contract. So if you are not the person listed on the contract, you may not receive that validation email necessarily. So please remember to check with the person that is listed on the contract, just in case you do send in a validation and perhaps don't receive a response. That might be why they may have responded, but simply sent it to the email address listed on the contract. So again, for rec meters to sell or Ethernet communications after it's installed in system line, you must still send an email to meterengineering@eversource.com, even if the validation is slightly different for the supplement. And with that, turn it over to UI for their portion.
This is Katarina Miller from UI. So UI metering requirements. All installation must follow the UI guidebook of requirements for electric service. All installation must follow the guidelines for interconnection. Installation shall meet published requirements for accessibility and location. Cost responsibilities. UI, in comparison to Eversource, will own, install, read, and maintain all meters and metering transformers within its service territory. Program participants, at their cost, will provide approved meter provisions and, if needed, instrument transformer cabinets. LREC ZREC metering requirements documents is located on UI LREC/ZREC program information and documents webpage. Metering information continues. Multiple provisions and cabinets may be required. Requirements for multiple provisions cabinets will be made by UI staff during early design meetings with installers. If the customer participates in Net Energy Rider, additional metering may be required. I just would like to add to this, so if there is a Net Energy Rider, you still will have to obtain the REC meter. And therefore, you will need to contact Meter Engineering Group at meterengineering.nerider@uinet.com. Just please make sure that this is your obligation and your responsibility to request the installation of the REC meter. You can also contact generator.connection@uinet.com. LREC ZREC meters will be located after any inverters and before any load. Power storage equipment, battery bank, and charger must be located between the generator and the inverter. Installation with power storage equipment will be net energy measured. Revenue meter data will be provided monthly to customers, including net energy pursuant to customer's tariff. UI will provide monthly LREC ZREC meter data to NEPU GIS for determination of REC generated. We do not have a portal on a website that will provide the metering data. You can request metering data, but it's done through a third party, and fee is applicable to that. To submit questions, you can contact lrec.zrec@eversource.com. Please do not submit questions via to webinar. Email question will be addressed. Master list of all questions and answers that were not addressed during this presentation will be sent to all webinar participants if applicable. The key documents, again, as you have mentioned earlier, amended solicitation plan revised on April 25, 2019, year 8 standard contract, acceptable forms and methods of providing performance assurance, Q&A, overview of the LREC ZREC program. Bid assurance is one of the important documents as well. For UI, please make sure that you use year 8 bid certification form. And I will turn it over to...
That's the end of the scheduled presentation for today. You can see on the next slide, as I mentioned earlier, that the rates information is available at the end of this presentation for everyone's reference, but it will not be discussed during today's presentation. So we have answered the questions that we received that weren't project specific during this presentation today, so we won't be sending a master list of any questions and answers out because we answered them during the presentation. Thank you everyone for your participation. If there's any questions regarding a specific portion of today's presentation, you can feel free to email the group that's responsible for that specific presentation piece, i.e. if there's a question regarding interconnection, you can email our interconnection groups, or if there's a question regarding metering, you can email our metering groups. Or if it's something about your LREC ZREC contract, you can always email us, and we are happy to help you, and we're happy to redirect if it's a question that's more specific to a different department or can better be handled by someone else. Our email addresses are lrec.zrec@eversource.com and lrec.zrec@uinet.com. Again, thank you all for spending your Monday morning with us. We really appreciate it. With that, we will be ending 30 minutes early, and thank you all.